Welcome. We're excited to have you participate in the Faculty Search Committee training for Miami University. First and foremost, we want to thank each of you for agreeing to serve on the search committee on behalf of the President, Provost, and Board of Trustees. While only the President or Provost can make an offer of employment, it's your work on this committee that is critical to get to that point and have the best, most inclusively excellent pool of candidates. During this session, we'll be focusing on bias and policies in relation to the search process. We know that tenure-track positions are long-term investments in many ways, for departments, colleges, and the university. Ideally, after a faculty member joins Miami, they will stay here for 25, 30 years. So, by the time we get to this point, you should have already been preparing for this search within the department through planning and discussions about overall direction, emerging areas, curricular needs, and goals for the department, for ideally at least the past year. You hopefully will also already have a plan for supporting the success of the new hire through an onboarding and mentoring structure and other areas in the department by the time a search becomes public. Now, before we begin the formal part of this training, we'd like to share Miami University's land acknowledgement.
Miami University maintains a strong reciprocal relationship with the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma.
Our land acknowledgement exists to reaffirm the Miami people's deep connection to their homelands and our commitment to each other.
The specific wording in Miami University's land acknowledgement is the result of an intentional collaborative process with the Miami Center and with review and approval from the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. As we begin, we'd like to share this land acknowledgement with you.
Miami University is located within the traditional homelands of the Miami and Shawnee people, who, along with other indigenous groups, ceded these lands to the United States in the First Treaty of Greenville in 1795.
The Miami people whose name our university carries were forcibly removed from these homelands in 1846.
In 1972, our relationship between Miami University and the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma began and evolved into a reciprocal partnership, including the creation of the Miami Center at Miami University in 2001.
The work of the Miami Center serves the Miami Tribe community and is dedicated to the revitalization of Miami language and culture and to restoring that knowledge to the Miami people.
Miami University and the Miami Tribe are proud of this work.
As we get started, I want to make clear that we're going into this with the understanding that we're all committed to being objective in judging candidates based on their credentials. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, we also know that there's plenty of research evidence that very clearly shows how biases we've developed over the course of our lives inform not only our lives outside work, but also our review of candidates. We can't suspend or eliminate all our biases. So we want to focus on how we can be intentional about recognizing, anticipating, and mitigating against our biases. And we can do this by being aware and accountable as a group and individually. Let me provide some examples. When we talk about fit or collegiality, these are charged terms because the discussion is often not about credentials or criteria everyone agrees upon, but about our own personal comfort levels with the gendered, racialized, and/or other identities of the candidate. If you find yourselves discussing someone's fit or collegiality, please pause to ask yourselves what exactly is meant by that. In looking at CVs, which we may consider to be central to our objective discussions, we also tend to show biases. For instance, you may have heard of studies in which identical CVs of academics were reviewed by other academics. One CV had a traditionally male name and the other a traditionally female name, and both men and women reviewers were more likely to rate the male applicant better, higher on teaching, research, and service. There have also been similar studies of CVs in which the only difference was the name of the school, Ivy League versus lower ranked or an HSI or HBCU, or the names of candidates were interpreted as being ethnic or foreign. Letters of recommendation are another common area in which our biases come out. For example, letters for men tend to be longer, tend to repeat standout adjectives like outstanding, excellent, and they tend to include more references to the candidate's CV and publications. Letters for women tend to be shorter, use a different set of adjectives like conscientious, meticulous, and hardworking, and they may include more references to personal life. We also know that citation patterns systematically favor male authors. So, overall, there tend to be biases that appear, according to available research, about racial minorities, women, especially women who are parents, LGBTQIA+ people, people with disabilities, immigrants, those from less prestigious institutions, and candidates whose work is outside the center of their discipline, which can prevent us from seeing exciting new areas, including interdisciplinary areas. We still have a lot of work to do in spite of good intentions, so it's important that we hold ourselves and each other accountable through a transparent process. One way to support a transparent process would be to create very clear criteria as a committee. Before you begin reviewing applicants' materials, the committee should convene and create a list of criteria. Begin with essential criteria, like can teach X courses and other critical pieces that are important aspects of the role and needs within the department. Then, go into developing highly desirable criteria, like it would be great if they can also teach Y or other valuable pieces that are not critical aspects of the role. For example, you may want to write up all the criteria on the board and ask, is there any other criteria anyone here wants to use? So, if someone says, well, it would be ideal if the person comes from a top 20 or top 10 program, then as a committee, you should discuss this and ask, what exactly and specifically are we looking for when we use that as a criteria? Because again, it's hidden criteria based on our biases of what is good or a fit that often comes in as hidden criteria. To reiterate, having biases means that we are often drawn to people who are like us in some way, or who went to an institution like the one we went to. Therefore, we need to be clear about why we are evaluating someone a certain way to avoid hidden criteria. Once the committee has finalized the criteria, everyone in the committee should stick to these criteria during the review of the candidate material and interviews. By following these pre-established criteria, we avoid hidden criteria, which is often where biases come in.
Now we will transition into the diversity statement part of the presentation. To begin, we would like to restate that diversity, equity, and inclusion are core values of the institution. Diversity statements for all tenure-track faculty searches are just one way in which the institution is intentionally infusing DEI into structural systems in place at Miami. At Miami, diversity statements are about 1 page long. They should focus on past and future contributions to DEI. We leave space for individuals to share future contributions to allow for candidates who have promise but may not have as extensive experience as other individuals, for example, recent graduates. This is an inclusive approach that will hopefully allow for more candidates to be eligible to apply and be considered in our faculty searches. Nationally, a lot of institutions are doing diversity statements. They are quite common. Most candidates expect to submit this as part of their materials. Miami's establishment of diversity statements as a required part of searches is a realignment with national trends. In addition, including these materials as part of the search also helps to reinforce the institution's commitment to DEI to prospective candidates. To begin, We want to reinforce that diversity statements are not about someone's identity or an autobiography. Poorly written statements are ones who only share their social identities and or provide a narrative of their life stories. A good diversity statement, on the other hand, would include a candidate's commitment to DEI and examples of how they can or have contributed to supporting these efforts. Next, sometimes there are concerns about plagiarism, but for the most part, plagiarism of statements can be easily unearthed. Faculty have experience and knowledge around this and can typically see what might be plagiarized. If you are ever in doubt, please feel free to contact OEO or OIDI, and we could support you in navigating that situation. Lastly, diversity statements are not political tests. Someone's political ideology has no bearing on the search process. Candidates should not be asked to disclose their political affiliation, nor should it be used in the evaluation of materials if it is included in the diversity statement. Some common approaches to addressing diversity statements are showcasing their capacity or ability to contribute to DEI efforts, sharing examples of past involvement with DEI initiatives and how they can continue to support similar efforts at Miami, or candidates share their vision for how to contribute to diversity more broadly within the field/discipline or in higher education more broadly, as well as at Miami. However, what typically happens is that sometimes candidates pull different elements from each approach listed above. There is no one way for a candidate to approach a diversity statement. As long as the candidate anchors their narrative around their commitment and contributions to DEI, they can approach it in any way they want. In addition, there may be candidates who share some of their social identities while others do not disclose at all. Ultimately, diversity statements are not about disclosing our gender, racial/ethnic, and or other identities. Therefore, the disclosure or lack of disclosure should not be included in the evaluation process of diversity statements. In thinking about the best practices when evaluating diversity statements, we strongly encourage you to review these materials alongside the teaching and research statements. Diversity statements should not be relegated to the end of the review of a candidate's materials or separate from a candidate's other materials. In addition, be mindful that statements may focus on one area or a combination of teaching, research, and service. Again, there is no right or wrong approach to including or not including one of the three areas, as long as they can speak to their commitment and contributions to DEI in one or more of these areas. Lastly, to help with this evaluation process, it will be important to create a rubric. OIDI has one available that is a great starting point for any committee. This file can be accessed by checking the resource section. The rubric we provide as an example has 5 major areas: understanding in DEI and higher education, research and research practices, teaching and mentoring, collaboration and leadership, and service engagement and or outreach. Each of these sections have a robust list of ways to assess a candidate's proficiency in that area. Your committee should use this template as a starting point and modify it as needed to meet the specific needs of the position and unit. Prior to the interview, make sure the committee has discussed what their commitment to diversity is. Make sure everyone can speak to that. Also ensure that all committee members have a baseline understanding of some DEI resources on campus, so everyone is able to speak to this if candidates ask you during the interview. Also consider the individuals the candidate will meet with. Are there interview sessions for the candidate to connect with individuals who can provide support or resources? The individuals and or groups selected for the interviews tell the candidates about the university and the climate on campus. Lastly, feel free to share the one-pager for affinity groups and the cultural resource guide found in the resource section. These are simple ways to show there are spaces outside of the unit that offer community building for candidates and offer them resources to explore how they can live in our community. We have the following Google document, Inclusive Interviewing, which can be accessed by visiting the resource section. Some simple recommendations that can be found in the document are incorporating DEI questions throughout the interview process, round 1, round 2, etc. We would also recommend for virtual interviews to copy and paste questions into the chat feature on Zoom to allow candidates to be able to read the questions as they are read aloud. However, if this is done for one candidate, it should be done for all candidates to ensure consistency in the interview process. We also encourage committees to include building names in the on-campus itinerary so candidates are able to research where they will be interviewing throughout the day. In this way, they are able to make personal determinations on shoe wear, clothing, and any possible accommodations they may need. And when thinking about supporting a candidate with accommodations, we ask that you use the language on the OEO website. So please disregard the information under the heading Offer Accessibility Accommodations because OEO has explicit language that should be used for all searches. Outside of this one note, the document offers some great examples and resources for supporting inclusive practices in virtual and in-person interviews. Please take some time to review the examples listed and see what approaches can be incorporated into your search. In addition to best practices and approaches to supporting an inclusive interview, we want to make sure to share some Miami University rules that all search committee members must adhere to. First, please remember that committee members may not apply for this position or write a letter for an applicant specifically for this position. When it comes to internal candidates, please do not include someone in the pool simply as a courtesy or because they are here. Courtesy interviews are not a good idea for anyone involved. Only include someone if they meet the search criteria. Additionally, please keep in mind that only members of the search committee can contact references. There are no exceptions to that. If the committee for some reason decides to go off list on references, you must notify the applicant first. Similar to references, some folks like to search on social media, but please remember that whatever you see in a Google search, you cannot unsee, even if it is wrong information which biases you against the candidate. So please do not Google folks unless one of two exceptions comes up. First, let us say a candidate put on their CV that they presented at X conference, but you were there and you do not remember seeing their session. You can check the conference website to verify this information. Along these same lines, if the candidate lists a publication in Y Journal and you are very familiar with that publication, but you do not recollect that work, it would be appropriate to double check to verify the authenticity of that claim. The second assumption would be if, let us say, 3 applicants out of a pool of 10 candidates included their professional websites. If you wanted to review all 3 applicants' websites and all committee members committed to this review, that would be appropriate. However, you would not be able to review one person's website and not others who had submitted websites as well. The goal is to ensure consistency in review of candidates' materials at all times. And as a side note, there is no expectation that the committee outreach to the remaining 7 candidates in this example to get their websites. If they did not submit it and you reviewed the other 3 candidates and everyone on the committee did so, you would have ensured consistent review of materials that were submitted by all candidates. Lastly, confidentiality. Without exception, all search committee meeting discussions must remain confidential. No committee conversation, evaluation, or assessments of applicants should be discussed outside of these meetings. Thank you for your time in this training and know that we are here if you have any questions. Everyone in the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion is here to support you and your colleagues in your search process. If you have any questions or want to talk through a situation, please feel free to reach out to anyone on our team.